All right, guys, welcome back to the channel. Hope you guys are doing well. Hope you guys pay attention to this video because it's a topic. It seems to be an issue throughout the food plot world, which is a very minute percentage of deer hunters. Tons of deer hunters in the world, but only a fraction of those deer hunters plant food plots. I mean, we're talking probably 5% people of deer hunters. Maybe even less than that. I don't know exactly what it is, but it's just my guess. It's a very small percentage that people that plant them. And in today's video, I want to talk about food plot weed prevention, because there's so many variables with this. There's so many issues, and there's many different ways that you can practice this. But there's a few guidelines that I have learned over the years that I want to share with you, leading up into the spring and even fall plots, really. But there's a process that you can take to limit the amount of weed growth that you have in your food plots, and I've done it many different ways. But in this method, we're basically going to describe how to plant a certain species of plants, dish the ground, and repeat process. And this is a year-round thing to prevent weeds. Now, number one to start out with is soil pH. A lot of people don't realize this is when you have a acidic soil, which is a low number on the pH scale, anything below a 6, the lower you go, the more weeds you're going to have. Weeds thrive in a acidic environment. So if you have a pH lower than 6, it's going to be a constant battle with weeds, because weeds are going to thrive in that acidic soil. Many different varieties. We don't need to name them, but you're going to have a weed problem. And when you start adding lime and correcting that soil pH over time through soil samples and adding lime, incorporating that lime back into the soil over years, over the next couple of years, you're going to limit the amount of weeds that you have in your plot, because your pH is going to go above a 6. The closer you can get to a 7 would be optimal. Usually if you're 6'5", 6'6", 6'7", 6'8", somewhere around that mark, I mean, you wouldn't have to worry about getting it any better than that. I'm not worried about getting it, a perfect 7. If you can get it there, then great. You're going to be able to utilize 100% of your fertilization. When you add that fertilizer to the soil, your plants are going to be able to incorporate that 100%. Not 100%, but close to that in theory. But when you have that low pH, you're going to have a weed problem. So always start, no matter when you plant food plots or what it is you're planting, spring, fall, summer, don't matter. Do a soil sample and you'll see what that pH is. Correct it with lime. You'll have less weeds. Now, when you are starting out a brand new food plot, say in the spring, you want to do a spring summer planting, whether it's a clover, chicory, some sort of buckwheat, even if you're doing soybeans, if needed, many different varieties. No matter what it is, that first year planting, I'm talking ground that has never been worked before, ground that has been untouched for many years, it's going to be full of weed seeds. My recommendation on that is the very first time is to do a burn down. And people will say, Dave, I thought you don't use chemicals. I never said I don't use chemicals. What I said is I don't like to use them, and you can do methods over the years to prevent the amount of chemicals that you do use. If I need to use glyphosate or 2,4-D or something to do a burn down, I will. Do I like it? No, I don't like it. But sometimes it's needed. So over the years, you use less and less and less and less. So number one, if it's a brand new plot and you work the ground, it's going to be full of weed seeds. So you need to do a burn down in spring green up when plants are actively growing. Do a mix of glyphosate, 2,4-D. That way you get your grasses and your weeds, and do a burn down. Let that sit. Temperatures are above 55, 60, 70. Do a burn down, burn it completely down. And if you have time, then you wait 2 weeks, you redisc it, and you wait 2 more weeks, 3 weeks, whatever comes back, you do a second chemical application, and that'll burn the weeds down, and then you should be pretty good to go. And with these methods, you'll be able to prevent any further use of chemicals. If you don't want to use chemicals that very first time, I'm fine with that. You will have a few weeds, you know, that you'll have to deal with. But here's the thing with weeds, deer eat weeds, right? So I don't care if there's weeds in the food plot in your spring and summer, because deer are going to eat them. Now, if it's overtaken by weeds, then no, it's not a good thing, because here we are trying to plant food plots, you're spending your money, and you're trying to get the biggest stand of your whatever it is that you plant. You're trying to get your money's worth. So if it's full of weeds, then no good. If it's not, you know, if you have some weeds here and there, who cares? Deer eat them. So the next step is to, once you do that burn down, whether you do it or not, is to disc the ground. You work those weeds back into the soil, and you plant something immediately before a rain, you know, heavy rain or whatever it is, and you get it to grow. Now, if you're planting buckwheat, which is my favorite thing to grow in the spring and fall, because it has weed suppression, it's very high in moisture content, it attracts bees, butterflies, and deer. Deer will eat it. Typically around the 60, 65 day mark, when it starts to flower, deer will eat that buckwheat, and it's very good for them. It's high in moisture content. You can snap, you know, a stalk of buckwheat in half, and water literally just shoots out of it. It's a very great thing to plant, weed suppression and all that. The next step is you let this grow for whatever it is, 6 to 8 weeks. And when it leads up into your fall planting, what you want to do is disc that buckwheat back into the soil. And I hate when people grow buckwheat just to kill it again with chemicals, because when you do that, when you plant something green and growing and then you kill it, you're draining that plant, you're draining that buckwheat full of moisture, you're drying it out, and you're killing that plant. That's what chemicals do. It dries that plant out, and the plant dies with salts and, you know, different types of things, whatever they add to that chemical. You're drying that plant out. So don't do that. Now, you have to assess this. You know, is the plot 100% full of weeds? If it is, then yeah, you want to burn that down again. But I would not. I would just take what's there and disc that back in, because at that time of year, most weeds are going into the dormant season where they're not going to regrow. So anyway, so when you get into mid-September, or mid-August, end of August, early September, you go to plant your fall food plot, depending what part of the country you're in, take that buckwheat and you incorporate that back into the soil. You add your fertilizer, and you throw a few bags of lime out to offset that fertilizer application, because every time you add fertilizer, it's going to drop your pH a little bit, because there's salts and different fillers and binders in that fertilizer. It's going to drop your pH down a smidge. So you add a few bags of lime to offset that drop in for pH levels. So you incorporate the buckwheat back into the soil, and before rain, and you plant wheat, oats, and rye. The application that I like to use, the seeding rate, is 100 pounds of winter wheat, 50 pounds of rye, winter rye, and 50 pounds of oats. So I'm adding 200 pounds of seed per acre into the dirt that you have worked the buckwheat back into the soil before rain. It rains, and you get a beautiful carpet of winter wheat, rye, and oats. If you can't add the rye, I'm okay with it. You can just use more wheat. I prefer winter wheat over winter rye. We've done tests on this, and the rye, we planted straight winter rye. Deer hardly touched it. We planted straight winter wheat. Deer loved it. You plant a mixture, then you have something that becomes palatable. You always have something working for you. Oats are good too, but I would not, if you're further up north, I would not use a pure stand of oats, because when it frosts, you get frost, that dies out. So I would not use 100% stand of oats. And you don't want to use too much, because then you lose your volume of winter wheat and winter rye that's going to withstand the harsh conditions, the wintertime, and all of that good stuff, especially the snow, further up north you go, and all that, the cold temps. Now you have a beautiful stand of this green carpet of winter wheat and oats, and then you let it go. You let this go. It'll go all through the winter time. You get a warm day in the, say, January, February, March, like today, it's like almost 50 degrees out. A little chilly, but you know, the deer have been in the fields. We've been getting pictures on the cameras on these past few days here in Maryland, and You go through the dormant season, through the winter time, and spring green up, winter wheat, rye will be the very first things that green up way before clover and way before browse. You'll get, depending on what part of the country you're in, how far north you are, you'll get anywhere from, my guess is from about 3 to 6 weeks of green growth before anything else in the woods. What that's going to do is provide many weeks, month, 6 weeks of extra food for the deer before spring green up, before clover. And it's going to be the very first thing, like I just mentioned, that greens up. You're going to provide that food value, and you're going to be growing the winter wheat and rye before weeds come out of dormancy. And when the winter wheat and stuff starts to grow, it's going to shade out the weed seeds, and it's going to lead you up into spring green up again. When you get into spring green up and you're ready to replant your spring food plots, spring summer food plots, you have a beautiful carpet of winter wheat, and you disc that back into the soil. You incorporate that back in. You do not kill it with chemicals, because you don't want to dry that out. When you dry it out and you kill it, it leaves no moisture value in the soil, and it falls apart, and it does not hold the soil together, especially if you're on hillsides and you kill it and then you disc the ground. It's no good. So you want to leave that green and growing carpet that you have, do not kill it, and disc that back into the soil, and then you replant, whether it's an annual clover or buckwheat. And you continue this rotation for several years, and eventually you eliminate weed growth. You may have some that pop up here and there in the spring and summer, but who cares? Deer eat weeds. And then you just continue this cycle, and this is a guideline to prevent weed growth in your food plots. If you have some weeds, who cares? If the plot's full of weeds, then it's no good. But hopefully you guys understand this. Chemicals are needed at some point in time of food plot planting. Are they needed 100% like people say? No, they are not. You just have to follow these guidelines to help you prevent weed growth, and hopefully this video helps you. If you guys have any questions, you guys can post them down below. I'd love to talk to you about it. Obviously this video is not for the no-till guys. If you're a no-till guy, and you want to leave a comment, go ahead. I'd love to talk to you about it. Like I said, there's pros and cons to everything. My preferred method is disking the ground. That's what I like to do to build up organic matter. Killing something that you plant, it just irritates me. And then dropping plants and crimping and all this other stuff over top of the soil to build soil on top of soil. I just don't like that. It doesn't make sense to me. I get it, but I don't like that method. I like incorporating it back into the soil, building the organic matter that way. I mean, I have soil samples where I have 15, 20% organic matter, CECs in the 14s and 15s and 16s and 17s and 18s, and people are like, how the flip are you doing that? How are you getting a CEC that high? How are you getting an organic matter percentage that high? And it's simple. We incorporate it back into the soil. We always have something green and growing for as many months out as possible, and that's how you do it, guys. Drop a comment. Hopefully you guys are doing well into 2021. Any questions? I'll talk to you down in the comments. I'll see you guys.